we're now seeing these reckonings, and they're happening sequentially instead of like simultaneously. Um, and for hip hop, it's happening later, and I don't think it's going to happen until people like you and I, who love the culture, who are of the culture, who have represented the culture, I believe, in a way that most people who really, grew up in it respect. You know what I mean? Start to call it out. You know, and I don't think I would be a true hip hop fan if I couldn't also acknowledge our flaws.
I think hip hop will always be a voice for the people.
Yo,
Hey, what's up, man? How you doing?
man, I'm all right. How you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well.
Am I looking clear or looking cloudy? And I don't mean my
Well,
eyes, my disposition.
you are veer clear.
Okay, cool.
How about me? How about me?
You're looking good, man.
All right.
I never explained, but part of the reason why I did that is, I take my camera. Like, I'm not with that, like having people being able to look at it, what I mean, stuff, So, like, I guess the gunk had gotten up on the camera, but I got this
Yeah,
thing on Amazon where you could just stick it on and slide it back and forth. So,
absolutely. Now your headphones are in. You sound a little bit less than clear. I mean, I can hear you, but it's just not as clear as usual.
Okay, how's it sound now? I'll project.
Way, way better. You got it.
Yeah, okay, I'm high energy now.
Yeah.
Ah.
Yeah. You are Busta Rhymes on a Redman.
Yeah, speaking of that, I know we usually keep it like EPMD and keep it strictly business,
Yeah.
never personal. But you had something crazy happen to you this week. And I talked to you, but it's the first time we've seen each other face to face since it
Yeah.
happened. So,
Man,
let's talk about it.
For the first time in my life, I was robbed. I think of the 1-900 Hustler lyric. And FYI, I've never been robbed in my life. I can't say that anymore. I live in Philadelphia. I've lived here half my life, for the most part. I'm 36, and I've been here since '02. If the math could be a little bit off, but yeah, I was robbed at gunpoint, man, and it was just a wild experience for me. I've gotten so when I was 16 or 17 years old, I read this book by a former writer for The Source and a few other rap pubs called No More Prisons, William Upsky Wimsat, and it taught me at a young age that this idea of quote unquote bad neighborhoods is a myth and all of this stuff. So for most of my adult life, I don't always move the smartest. I mean, I think I'm very street smart. I don't carry a wallet. I rarely wear a watch if I'm on the street walking. But I say all that to say, at Tuesday night, I was walking home. It was right around midnight, and I didn't choose the smartest path. And I was walking a residential street that had very, very, very poor lighting. I had earphones in, which is not a great idea. I was blasting music, which is, my happy place, my stress relief. And, and I wasn't of necessarily the clearest head. And, yeah, a guy ran up on beside me and stopped, and I put my headphones out, and he put a gun in my face, a semi-automatic, like right here. And at first I just started like instinctually backing up and turning to run, as I have, at times in the past when, just over the years living in Philly, like, there's times you get jumped or whatever, and I'm always guard up that way. And there was another guy behind me, and he kind of boxed me in, and they said, no, we just want your money. We just want your money. And as I said, I don't carry a wallet. So I just reached in, I kept my head down. And the whole time I'm just like, man, getting shot wasn't in my mind, but getting pistol whipped or just kind of like cheap shot on the side of the face, which has happened in my life, that was in my mind. And, it was funny too. I had $12 on me. They didn't want my cards. I had my phone in my hand because I was listening to music. I was listening to Santa Gold. which is not some hard, that is some music possibly to get robbed to. But they took the $12, didn't want the phone, and off they went. And yeah, and I mean, the money's irrelevant. I mean, money matters right now. I'm currently, unemployed, but it's funny. Earlier in the day, I had over a couple $100 on me, and when I left the house that night, it was the first time since COVID, since the shutdown, since quarantine, that I had taken public transportation. And I jumped on the trolley, and I knew that I was probably going to be walking home. And I said, you know what? I don't need all this money. There's nothing I'm going to buy. Let me just leave enough money if I sprain my ankle and I need a cab or I need to buy some water or something. So luckily I didn't have much on me. And even the guy said to me, he's like, $12. And off they ran. So yeah, it was a jarring experience. I laugh about it because that's how I handle, drama/trauma. But yeah, I've never had a gun pointed in my face. And like, I grew up somewhat, around guns. My father likes to target shoot, like pistols. So I know a thing or two about guns, but never had one at my face like that, man. It was wild. And I've seen shootings and stuff before, but never been involved.
Yeah, when I got your text, man, I was like, yeah, I was shaking for you. You know what I mean? Like, we've all, the COVID thing has taken over so much that we forget that there are so many other real dangers in the world. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And truthfully, like just the thought of like you not being around was like kind of something that really kind of shook me. You know what I mean? Because you are one of the people that has, is closest to me in life right now. You know what I mean? And you've been there for me through some of my hardest times in life. So that was a text that really kind of like shook me. You know what I mean? I was very glad though to hear that you were okay, not only physically, but I wanted to make sure you were okay mentally, because that's a traumatic thing. You know what I mean? To like have a gun in your face and like not know what the person, that's a very traumatic thing.
Yeah, I mean, it was weird like that, and I appreciate you saying that. It's funny. I mean, I texted my girlfriend whose house I had left to go back to my place, and she, for whatever reason, her phone, it didn't ring, and you know what I mean? It didn't, she couldn't hear it, and she slept. And so the only person I knew was like, around, so my inner circle, like you, and you're 3 hours behind. So I knew you'd be up. And honestly, as I walked home, I think you and I had texted about some new music that had dropped or something. So I knew that you were up. And yeah, and I mean, my takeaway is, anytime anything ever happens in life, I feel like if you alter your life, you let whoever, whatever, thing it is, it can be person, it can be, nature, but you can't let them win, So for me, I mean, I've stayed walking home, but at that hour with phones in, taking kind of a dumb route, I drove by yesterday where it happened, and there's like 3 trees. It was just the perfect place for, for lack of a better, jokes. So I want to be smarter, and it's just a wake up call. And for me, it's funny, like, I'm 36 years old, and I laugh because like, as a young kid, I often, walked with that kind of attitude that I think a lot of people, men and women that listen to hip hop have, of like, test me, like, anytime I'm on the street, like, I'm very polite to everyone, because that's how I was raised, but I look everyone I pass in the eye, not in a menacing way, because, that's pointless, but I've always had an air of confidence about me. And it's funny that like, that one time I didn't, and I got tested. And I was thinking, just as a fan of music and pop culture, I mean, there's plenty of great films about people getting jammed up. But even that night, in the next 2 hours, and we can talk about that in a second, what transpired after. But like, you and I were texting of what are the songs in hip hop where a rapper, an MC, has admitted the vulnerability of getting, jammed up or preyed on. And the classic one is obviously regulate, and that that story ends differently than it starts. But yeah, it was wild.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, I shot, most deaths, got, but that's still third party perspective, So, yeah, man, there's a part two to the story though. Part two is, you saw those guys run up on some dudes, just like right up on some dude right up the block and pull the same caper,
Well, it
right?
was actually a woman and a man, I think, and for me, with the gun involved, I don't, I don't own a gun. And that's been something, just as I've gotten older, that like has been, it's been something I've thought about. Like, do I ever want a gun in the house? And, you know, I, people in my life, both in the city and where I grew up in Pittsburgh, are people, gun beside the bed type people, and or gun in the glove box, whatever. And I'm not been that. And so when I saw that happen, I felt in a way like a coward because I couldn't intervene. And it was a woman and possibly a man with her at the end of the block where it happened with me, which is crazy because at that point, you're very close to a thoroughfare, like literally 20-yard pass from where this is happening. There was like 5 people outside of a bar, like in the street enjoying drinks. So it's very wild that way. And so yeah, I get home, I text you, you and I speak on the phone, and I've never called the police to report a crime on somebody else that I can recall. Once or twice I've been driving and I've seen a drunk driver that I thought was going to cause problems, and I've called 911 and reported that, and I don't know what's transpired. But it didn't, and I'm not trying to sound, Dipset, stop snitching, but it didn't necessarily enter my mind to call the police. And you and I spoke on the phone, and the fact that what I think I witnessed after my incident dealt with a woman, you were like, yo, man, you've got a sister, and you have kids and all of this. You're like, you should call the police because at least it gets it on paper. So, I live in West Philadelphia. I have no problem saying that. And I called what I thought was the local precinct. I got, kind of snapped at, like, don't call us, call 911. So I called 911, and this was reluctant of me to call. And I called 911, and they asked me what happened. Boom, boom, boom. I explained the same thing I told you. And they were like, well, to document this, we need to send an officer to your house. And I said, well, you know what? I wasn't a jerk about it. I was just like, yo, I don't want that. I'll meet the officer on the corner. And I stated, the intersection, and they were like, okay, we'll call it in. And I went outside with my dog, who often makes cameos in these podcasts. I waited for more than half an hour. Nobody showed. And at this point, I had to be up early in the morning. The next morning, I stayed up until after 2 a.m. They never took down my phone number, but I'm assuming 911 has it. No follow through, no call. And yeah, it's just that raises a host of questions for me. I mean, I've never, just based on what I'll call white privilege, like I've never had the feeling that the police, wouldn't respond to me. But at the same time, I've never relied on the police much in my life. But I live in a neighborhood that has been very heavily protest filled. You can't really walk around my neighborhood and not see a Black Lives Matter banner or George Floyd's name, and other martyrs in storefronts. So my neighborhood, and I assume my precinct, if you want to go by that jurisdiction, has been very outspoken. It made me wonder, like, is this the police saying, like, yo, F you guys, you're on your own?
Yeah. Yeah, retaliate. I mean, is your neighborhood I'm assuming ethnically diverse, right?
It is. I mean, you've made several trips to where I live, and I mean, West Philadelphia has, a very complicated history, but for your lifetime and mine, it's been a predominantly Black neighborhood. My neighborhood is blended, but it's not necessarily. One of the things I like about it is it's not gentrifying in a way that a lot of places around Philly and New York seem to. Like, yeah, there's a CVS and a Rite Aid, but you're not like, I don't know that if a Target opens up in my community that it'll be supported. it's very grassroots, very community, driven. There's a lot of history there, and there is. I mean, it's truly, Philadelphia has a long history of lack of harmony in its city, but I look at my community and I get a great sense and a respect for diversity and racial and class harmony and all of these things. So yeah, it was wild, and it's funny. Even as I waited on the corner with my dog, I was like, man, I've lived here a number of years. I don't even want to necessarily be seen talking to the police right now. But forget that vanity, forget that, complicated issue. Like, for the same reason you urged me to do it, like, it should be done. Like, I don't want this to happen to other people, and I don't want this to happen to anyone really, but I'm thinking of women and children. I'm thinking of my younger sister. I'm thinking of your children. Yeah, it needs to be stopped. But yeah, I mean, it's been a weird week, man. It's been a weird, I mean, everyone's saying it. 2020 is odd,
Yeah, for me, the thing that really got me, was that you saw it unfold, like literally just right after it happened to you again. You know what I mean? And I just thought about the fact that, it'd be very easy for a situation like that to go bad. You know what I mean? And someone to lose their life or be, gravely injured. So, but I'm glad that you're doing okay. I'm glad you were willing to talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, that was, you and I want to make this podcast real. It's not about you and I, but it also is. And, this week, there's plenty to talk about, but there's not a lot of music. And the podcasts that I listen to, the radio shows that I listen to, the TV shows that are talk driven, you want to learn more about the people behind it. And, yeah, and it's crazy. I mean, I'll share one more thing on that. Like, when it happened, robbery was not the first thought in my mind. Like, there's so much violence going on in the world, but also in the country right now. And I'm just thinking, like, are people just losing their shit? Like, are people just out? So when a dude puts a gun in my face, like, I don't know if he's trying to earn points. I don't know what it is, but that's instinctually, that's why I backed up. And yeah, it's crazy. So
I do think people are losing their shit. I mean, I think that is driving a lot of what's going on now. I mean, we talk about COVID from a physical health standpoint, right? We don't talk about the mental that often, but, just think about the level of anxiety people are under, under tremendous financial pressure, because a lot of people have lost their jobs. Most people are living, check to check. And so, like, this is unlike anything most people have ever seen. We've been forced to stay inside for, 3 months. And now that we're able to go out, we got to wear masks, we got to stay 6 feet away from people. Every single
and you turn on the news in the middle of it.
Yeah. And every single person you encounter is a potential weapon, right? Like, every single person you encounter is a danger to you, to your life. Even if you decide you want to go out to a restaurant or something like that, you don't want to touch the menu, you don't want to touch the silverware, you don't want to, every time you touch the table, you feel like you got to wash your hands. The people serving you are wearing not only masks, but like plastic shields, like in a hazmat suit.
Yeah.
Like, the amount of just pure mental duress that we're all under, on top of it, is compounded now by, and, probably fueled in part by, but, the divisiveness in the country over, Black people still being killed on video, and, the level of protests. And so the angst that, that's ensued with that in an election year with an incredibly
and then you've got
president,
and you've got white people day in and day out that are calling the cops on Black people,
Right.
And walking in the stores and using slurs, and brown people, and yeah, I mean, and that is the content that's prevailing on our social timelines. And I'm not saying that it shouldn't. Absolutely, like, we need change. But yeah, I mean, it's
we're in a bad place mentally. We're in a very, very bad place mentally. I don't think we're going to understand the full psychological impact of this stuff for decades, but, like, it's corrosive. I think it's been undermined too by social media. We talked about this a little bit, about how social media has created this disconnect from people over the years, and that's now, you know, being compounded by the fact that everything we do is virtual. We just don't see each other as human beings anymore, you know, and
Right.
so I think it's contributed to a level of callousness that is, you know, really destructive to, like, you know, the fabric of what makes us humans, you know.
Man, and every shape and yeah, I mean that I just completely agree, and it'll be really interesting to see how we come out of this year. And I thought about it too. I mean, the state of Pennsylvania, as I said a moment ago, like I am currently self-employed slash unemployed, and I, you know, applied in March. It was not until last week that I received $1. So, and I'm talking to a lot of people that relate to that, and you know, I don't the chances that the dude that put the gun in my face, he very well might be in those same shoes and not having a check show up. Not to say that I sympathize with my, you know, attacker in that moment, but if you're out here robbing two people on the same block, like something's up. You need that money one way or another. And you know, it's not just a simple come up.
Yeah. So, you know, there was some new music that came out. You know, Big Boy and Sleepy Brown put out a song,
Yeah.
and a video. Did you see it? Did you see the video?
I did. I did. You
Yeah.
know, they've been working together. Yeah. And I forget the name. You remember the title?
It's Can't Sleep, I believe.
Yeah. There you
Yeah.
go.
And the video. Okay, so the song is cool. It's fine. You know what I mean? Like, Big Boy and Sleepy have collab obviously a ton of times, and you know it's not the greatest collaboration, but it's fine. You know what I mean? But the video, I looked at it and it struck me because it was him and Sleepy like driving and standing around, and a bunch of women in, like, you know, very very scanty bikinis, just shaking, you know, all around them, you know,
Yeah.
with no purpose other than that. That it didn't drive anything about the song. It didn't drive the narrative of the video. They were literally just, you know, accoutrements, you know, just, and so you and I, you know, people, I don't think people understood this because we never really articulated it publicly, but we had a pretty like stringent review process for, and standards and practices basically for what videos we put up, and we really kind of took a hard line on videos that objectified women, unless there was some other like deeper narrative behind it, you know. And
Mm-hmm.
I had this at BET too, like even before you came aboard in 2012, when Two Chainz's birthday song featuring Kanye West came up. I didn't post that song on AFH because the video was just so over the top, like objectifying of women, that I just wasn't down for it. You know what I mean? And when we had Amanda writing for us, you know, a woman, we were very
Anita, yeah.
sensitive to that, you know, and you and I just, but you know, it struck me that like now when the rest of the world is kind of caught up to, you know, all the issues that women have faced and the sexual harassment and sexual abuse and things like that that was raised with the Me Too movement, that rap videos still kind of cater to this, like, you know, super misogynistic and objectifying imagery fairly often. And like, you know, I wanted to like just talk about that, get your thoughts on it, and like, you know, explore it a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I saw the video and I thought it was like, you know, I have the utmost respect for Big Boy, Outkast, Sleepy Brown, Organized Noise, like, and they've been working together since Outkast's first album, you know, because Sleepy is obviously part of ON. And, you know, I looked at it and part of me wanted to say like, okay, well, you know, Atlanta is built around strip club culture and car candy paint culture. But still, I mean, those guys, because the song itself is kind of cool to me. Like, I like it. And you can just do better. I mean, and I don't mean to make them the scapegoats for that, but I do know from, you know, what you just said, I don't think it's a video that we would have posted on AFH.
Yeah.
And we, you know, we love those guys. I mean, Outkast is, you know, on the Mount Rushmore, you know, for us, and
Yeah.
you know, so to speak. So yeah, I mean, I think it's got to do better, and often I think so many artists just make that video probably because it's fun. You know, you can take a budget, hire dancers or models or whatever, bring your homies, you know, but what is that doing in the face of the culture? And what, even something like, okay, you know, Drake, one of his breakthrough videos was Best I Ever Had, which
yeah.
Kanye directed the video, and it was I forget who was the famous model that was in it. It wasn't Rosa Coast, somebody, but you know, it was very much objectifying women and all of that. And even still, I feel like history says that despite the star power behind Kanye directing a Drake video at that major inflection point of Drake's career, that video did little to further Drake. That video is not iconic.
Yeah.
And you know, we'll talk about Kanye more as we go, but it's funny, he released a video, re-released a video that we never got to see, that to me is everything that's great about a rap video. And yeah, I mean, these joints, you know, I for years called them kind of like world star videos of just like strip club. Even Crit with Money on the Floor, which is such a great record, he could have come with an iller concept for the visual, you know.
Yeah,
what do you think?
See, this is an interesting thing to me. Like hip hop, you know, in some ways it's so progressive. You know, we've talked about over the last couple of weeks the protest music, not only that has come out like on Juneteenth this year, but you know, over the decades, that has driven, that has alerted people to the things that like people woke up to about systemic racism and like police brutality and things like that. Hip hop has been the driver of that, the driver of social change and the narrator of the streets. So it's very progressive in some ways, but in other ways, it's very behind the times. You know, we took an active stand. You know, I personally, when gay marriage was legalized, and you know, ran the headline on Facebook. You know, now that gay marriage is legal, when will hip hop stop being so homophobic? You know, like, and then you see, like I said, I think it's particularly noteworthy that it's post Me Too movement, because, like, you know, before that, yeah, people knew it was not like so kosher, and like, you know, especially Black women would point out to Black men like how, you know, destructive the imagery would be, but it was still kind of accepted, you know what I mean? Or, you know, at least not tolerated. But after Me Too, it just is shocking to me that people would continue to put out this kind of like imagery. And it's not to single out Big Boy and Sleepy at all, you know, because they're not the only ones doing it. But, you know, I just wonder how we can be so advanced in some ways and yet so behind in other ways.
Big time. And I mean, you look at, first of all, some of the most iconic videos in hip hop, like Hype Williams, you know, Big Pimpin', Jay-Z and UGK, and you've got the pouring of champagne on women. You look at Nothing But a G Thing, which I think Dre and maybe Philip Atwell directed, and amazing video, but let's not forget the parts of those videos where, hey, you got the guys coming behind and pulling the woman's top off. Or I think it was the, you know, F with Dre Day, where the woman's being stuck up at the party and everyone just covers her with beer.
Gin and juice, yeah.
Gin and juice.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's funny, like you watch these videos and those were my bread and butter coming up. I mean, those visuals, especially with the cars and just the attitudes, allured me into hip hop, into, you know, my life's work right now. And there's so many parts of these things that don't age well. Same as certain disc records, you know. And yeah, it's got to do better. And I look at myself, I mean, you asked me over the course of our friendship, which goes back to 2013, you've asked me a number of times as a white guy, like, yo, have you ever said the N-word? And I think you mean with a soft A. I hope, you know. And I, you know, hand on my Bible, I didn't even read it in school. I've not.
Not even like rapping, like by yourself.
No. You
I don't know.
play juicy. You don't buy it. But I'll say, and I'm not proud of it because I have a lot of people I love that are in the LGBTQ community. You know, I've used the other F word, you know, growing up. And I listened this week, the Beatnuts, you know, had an anniversary for Street Level. And I played that album a lot this week. And it's filled with F-bombs, like the other F-bomb. And I think of Parrish Smith, you know, on the joint with LL. And it just like so crisp, that vocal. And yeah, in retrospect, classic records are marred by their homophobia and their misogyny. And, you know, I would love to see hip hop do better fast in those two arenas. Not to say we haven't come a long way, but we got a ways to go. I mean, there's still AO and pause, and I participate in that, and we
Yeah,
still got a way to go.
yeah. There are reckonings. You know what I mean? Like, and I think so. Me Too was a reckoning. Everyone knew that, like, sexual harassment was wrong. It was clearly
Yeah.
illegal. Coercing a woman into doing something sexual was wrong. Legally and morally. Um, and so when it became public, and it's not a surprise to me that R. Kelly, even though people knew for 20 years what R. Kelly
Yeah.
was doing, that his downfall didn't come until after that movement. It's odd to me that people didn't start to like take stock of other areas of life and say, wow, this is not right behavior. Systemic racism, like, was wrong. And, why didn't people start to evaluate that then, that along with Me Too, and other things. And we're now seeing these reckonings, and they're happening sequentially instead of like simultaneously. Um, and, for hip hop, it's happening later. And I don't think it's going to happen until people like you and I, who love the culture, who are of the culture, who have represented the culture, I believe, in a way that most people who really, grew up in it respect, what I mean, start to call it out, and, I don't think I would be a true hip hop fan if I couldn't also acknowledge our flaws. It's
Yeah.
not trying to tear it down, it's just trying to make us better. And so that's why, I think it's important for people like us to have the conversation.
Word. And I mean, I personally liked AFH's stance. I don't think you and I and Amanda and all of our contributors, I don't think we ever set out to cancel anybody. Like, that was not what we woke up to do in the morning. We would have some hard questions. I mean, for me, it was very odd. I did a lot of the reporting and the research in 2015 with Africa Bambaataa, and the sex abuse scandal with, underage boys. And that was hard. But we owed that to the public, and there were a lot of places that weren't ready to go there, and AFH was. And yeah, we hold ourselves accountable, and not for nothing. I mean, sex and sexuality, there is a place for it in hip hop. I mean, a few weeks back, my song of the week was Sugar Free, Thinking. And I look, Kendrick Lamar made a video. What? You'll know the song, but the one with Terry Crews in the strip club, like the Peep Show joint.
These walls. Yeah.
Right. Which is an incredible record to do that to. But there was artistic vision there. It wasn't just like, let's hire 4 or 5 women, get the camera person to shoot, certain parts of their body, and let's bop to the beat, which again is not an indictment to Sleepy and Big Boy, because I don't care who your favorite MC is. They've done it too. But I just feel like we're owed as a public so much more, and there's so many more interesting places to take the question.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good example of the lines, how we drew the lines, right? Like, Kendrick, These Walls, it starts off, as you may recall, actually, I was the one who pointed this out, was they did a scene based on the scene from Minister Society.
Mental Society.
In the car with AWAX and O-Dog and Kane in the car, it was framed just like that. And the entire song was a metaphor for sex, and so like, having sexual stuff is supporting the narrative at least. So there's some sort of like alignment with what it was, But you mentioned the Africa Bambaataa thing. Man, dude, like, that was really hard for me. Like, growing up in that era, like Planet Rock was one of my, I think I told you, Planet Rock was the first time I ever had a hip hop experience live. I was in San Francisco. It was 1982. I was 12 years old.
Year it came out. Yeah.
I had never ever seen breakdancing before or heard that song. And we were walking, I think it was on Fisherman's Wharf or something like that, my mom and I saw these kids doing this space age dancing to this like this space age song, and a futuristic song. And it was 6 months later that I figured out that was called breakdancing, and that like the song was Planet Rock. And everything that Africa Bambaataa did after that was like, just like the shit to me. And I even have a tattoo with the 4 elements of hip hop, and it's like a MC, like it's a b-boy with a microphone for a torso, and he's spinning on a turntable. One arm is a needle on the turntable, the other arm's a headphone jack into it. And on the record, it says Planet Rap. Now it
Oh,
was an
what?
ode to Planet Rock, but I always thought it
Yeah.
was really ironic that like one of the iconic hip hop songs would be called Planet Rock, so I made it Planet Rap. But that's how deep, you know, my love for like, you know, Bambaataa and what he contributed to the culture goes. So to have to run that story was really, really painful, but it's the perfect example of how you can love something and still acknowledge its flaws, right? And want it to do better, you know?
Yeah, and you
So
got to have that conversation. And for me, like, that's again, as the discussion moves, it's funny. Like, true of Russell Simmons too. I have no problem as a media person and as a hip hop fan giving Bambaataa and Russell their flowers for their contributions to the culture. And take one step further and look at rock and roll. You know, Dave Chappelle. You know, thanks to you, I got to see Chappelle live on New Year's Eve, and in Philly. My girlfriend and I went, and he has a whole bit in his new. I don't know if the public will ever see this or not, but it's about Chuck Berry, and it's this like 15-minute drawn out joke, sort of like what he did with
Bill Cosby.
well, the Cosby are also, you know, the Pimp Book, you know, in the
Iceberg
Netflix
Slim.
special. Yeah, Iceberg Slim.
Yeah.
Thank you. And you know, you look and Little Richard passed away, you know, a few weeks back, and Little Richard, you know, you had Jerry Lee Lewis, who marries his underage cousin, Chuck Berry, who has a host of transgressions against women, from battery to sex charges to a host of R. Kelly like allegations, and you still give these guys credit for their contributions to rock and roll, but not for nothing. You've got Little Richard in the middle, who, you know, was an openly gay man, but never arrested, as far as I know, for any of this stuff. So when you look at hip hop's pioneers, I don't believe in muting Bambaata's name from that discussion. That is, uh, you know, damning to journalism and reporting and history. Same with Russell Simmons, but you just got to tell it like it is, and or at least let it be known the allegations against these men. How about
Yeah.
that? You know?
Yeah. I mean, that's the danger of cancel culture, right? Like, you know, we don't want one side wiping off another side's historical achievements because they don't like something they did. We can't do
Yeah.
that either, you know? That doesn't mean deny, right? We got to be truthful. Like we should have learned, like as kids, what Columbus really was about, you know.
Yeah.
You know, but there are some things that still happen that you know. So yeah, man, yeah, it's really complicated, but you know, it's an ongoing discussion regarding that. You know,
Most definitely.
you mentioned Kanye. Kanye, man, that guy. So on Friday, they announced a Gap partnership between Kanye and that he was going to start to make T-shirts, hoodies, and one other like item of clothing for Gap. And
Yeah.
Gap's stock increased by 40% on that day on the news of it. Like, you know, despite everything that's happened with Kanye, you know, with Trump, with the MAGA stuff. And by the way, like, you know, interestingly, Kanye is one of the lead, you know, is making some very significant, you know, donations toward Black Lives Matter.
And appeared in protests and
Yeah, and, you know, he's very complicated in that way. He's never allowed himself to be put in a box. But, you know, it's fascinating to me that when all is said and done, and, you know, it's 40 years out, and people look back at Kanye West, he might be looked at much more as a person who influenced fashion than he was a producer or rapper. Like, what do you think about that?
yeah, I mean, it's hard for you or I speak for myself. It's hard for me to ever see that for anyone who lived through the mid 2000s and watched his rise. But we've watched him transcend into mogul. Same as like Jay-Z will always be an MC to me first, and then all of these other things. But I do feel like to, you know, an 18-year-old right now, sure, you're going to see Kanye as all of these other things, and then music almost as an afterthought. And I love this story. I mean, you know, Kanye worked at the Gap, and so he did something really dope just in the last 24 hours. I don't even know if you know this, but he released the video to Spaceship, which was never officially released. It was in that early, you know, college dropout era, GLC's in it, Consequences in it. And though they don't call it the Gap, flowing in line with the lyrics of the song, all three of them are in the Gap at the mall, like dreaming of their, building a spaceship to make their dreams come true. And yeah, I mean, Kanye is just so deliberate to let that go right now. That is one of my favorite Kanye songs, especially on College Dropout. And yeah, I mean, he went from being an employee to probably an equity play,
Yeah, I saw that on Two Dope Boys. I wasn't sure if that was just a repost from Mecca because when I looked at it, the video was dated 2009 on YouTube.
Yeah.
Um,
And
but either way, his impact and for him to like come from working at the Gap to like, the Gap almost working for him and to like partner
yeah,
like that and have that kind of impact. I hope he got equity first of all as part of his deal.
me too. It's a
But
10-year deal, I think, right?
yeah, yeah. But how do you? And I guess Michael Jordan is that way. I think that most kids born after 2000 really, and that
Yeah.
those are 20-year-old people now. Like see Michael Jordan much more as a shoe mogul than
Well,
as a
no, and
I mean, you understand he was a basketball star, right? But his relevancy to you is much more about his shoes than like him watching him as a player. Maybe you watch YouTube
right.
that.
Yeah, and that's what was so dope about The Last Dance is
Yeah,
like, I didn't pay attention to NBA basketball in the 90s like a lot of my friends did, and I never have owned a pair of Jordans in my life, but I knew he was a mogul, so I watched that and had a deeper appreciation, and I really regretted missing it, during the 90s because I am a sports fan, and that would have been, I watched some of those finals games, but to not have the context of what he was really doing and what he came from, that was dope. And yeah,
yeah.
I'm
But
happy for Kanye. Oh, go ahead.
so with MJ though, like his legacy was what it was, right? Like it was untarnished. Kanye, in a lot of ways, in theory, has tarnished his image greatly, particularly amongst Black people. Over the
Hmm.
last like 5 to 7 years, with the affiliation with Trump, with slavery being like a choice, with even potentially his marriage to Kim, like all sorts of stuff that attacking J and B, the Black royal family, like
Yeah.
he is
Co-signing Candace Owens. Yeah.
he's violated on a lot of levels. So how is it that he can be perceived this way, and yet his clothes and shoes are still flying off the shelves?
It's a track record. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know who buys Yeezys. I made the comment about Jordans, which might change in the near future. But I've never owned a pair of Yeezys. Have you? Like, I've never owned anything that Kanye's
I would, but I
designed that I
can't get
know.
them shits. I mean, like if you get the hookup, let me know.
Word. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, I wonder. And truly, his track record with Adidas is nuts, So a lot of savvy day traders were probably like, yo, it's happening at Gap, and Gap has such a more accessible price point that this is only going to work. And it's funny too. I don't have the answer to that question. What do you think?
Man, I don't know. It's actually bizarre to me. Well, you know what it is? Okay, here's my theory, just like off the top. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think that people care anymore about what a person stands for. What's more attractive is how loud and attention
Disruptive.
grabbing they can be. 6ix9ine is the perfect example of
Yeah.
that, right? Kanye is like 6ix9ine. It's almost like people who like professional wrestling. You like the heel. You like
Yeah.
Darth Vader. You like whoever can command the attention. And Ye is masterful at that. Like I used to say that he was second only to Trump in terms of his ability to command
Yeah.
attention, and now I'd put him like behind 6ix9ine.
And that's true too, because there's a lot of meat and potatoes Republicans that would have never co-signed what Trump stands for, but simply because of his party affiliations and what he's fighting against, they get behind it.
Yeah,
There's a lot of like W era Republicans that it amazes me, but there they are, and he's loud and he's brash and all of these things. And yeah, 6ix9ine, Kanye, it's crazy too.
it's a cult of personality, and I think that the thing that all three have in common is they have an air of just doing whatever they want to do.
Yeah,
They march to the beat of their own drum. No one dictates how they move. And I think that people love that. I think it represents freedom. I think most people aspire to that. Now, they might not subscribe to the ideology,
Yeah.
but they want to have that kind of bravery, that kind of courage to just do whatever they want to do. And I think that maybe is what it stands for ultimately.
So you have three almost teenage age sons. Do they think the Gap is cool? Do you have any sense for their
They never
temperature?
like they never had any Gap stuff. Like,
Yeah.
my youngest, first of all, is like, a hype beast when it comes to shoes. That dude, like, he can tell you whatever shoes, and like, he will
Yeah.
read me on my shoes every day. Like he's like, yo, man, those shoes is like, how come you wearing those shoes, dog? Like, I mean, my oldest
Yeah.
too. My middle son doesn't really, fashion is, he doesn't really care about it so much, but
Yeah.
none of them have, and even when it was back in the day, it was like Abercrombie and Hollister was it for a minute, and now it's Jordans and stuff like that. But yeah, my youngest, my 10-year-old would love a pair of Yeezys. Like, yeah, he knows the online sites to go to, and like, Flight Club in New York is like a fantasy place for him and
Stadium.
everything. Yeah. But I guarantee they'll check for Gap now.
It's
That's the
interesting
power
too,
of Kanye.
and that's what I thought too. Like growing up for me, Gap was always interesting. Like they in the early '90s seemed like the cool store, and actually JP, who was part of AFH for some years, had a position at Gap, and he told me something that blew me away. Is like in San Francisco in '69, which is the year that they throw on all their stuff. Gap began, I believe, as a record store that was buying up Levi Strauss and reselling them at a premium when those were the Yeezys of the late '60s, and then they built in manufacturing. But I remember, like as a teenager, the Rob Swift commercial with Gap, with him and Shannon Sossamon, like on the crab script, like Gap has tried to dabble in hip hop before, and they've done it with some integrity. This will be interesting to see
Yeah.
because I don't know the Gap is super relevant.
They had the
And
LL commercial. We reposted that, right? When
that's right.
LL
Yeah.
hijacked them to like make it into a FUBU ad. Like that was
Right.
the coolest ever.
Yeah.
I mean, for those who don't recall, it's on the site, but like, LL did this. It was a high paid spokesperson for the Gap and made it real cool because that was like L at his pinnacle. And his tagline was Gap, it's for us, by us, and he had the FUBU hat on. It was like the illest
Classic
ever. You know what I
LL.
mean? Yeah. So yeah, but yes, they were kind of like Sprite for a minute, where they had legit like hip
Yeah.
hop affiliation.
Cultural capital.
Yeah.
So this week I listened to something that I found so interesting. Beastie Boys. In the last 2 years, Beastie Boys came out with a book. I did the audio book, which they read, and then a lot of guests come in and read. They had Nas, Will Ferrell, LL, a host of different people. Great book. Audio book was dope. You don't get the photos. I need to buy the audio book. And then now, a couple months ago, they have the Apple TV exclusive, which I encourage everyone to watch. Documentary directed by Spike Jonze, but it's a stage show, sort of like what Mike Tyson did. And there's a lot of cool video and footage, more photos than anything that they kind of like talk through, especially remembering MCA. So last week, Ad Rock and Mike D go on Rick Rubin's Broken Record podcast, which we've covered before. Rick had that big conversation late last year with Andre 3000. He's had some dope guests over time. It's him and Malcolm Gladwell, but Gladwell's not on this one. But it's the first time Rick Rubin has spoken to at least Ad Rock in 20 years. And it's a raw, really interesting podcast as we talk about kind of muting names. Oddly enough, Russell Simmons' name's only mentioned one time. But it was dope to me just as a fan of both Rick Rubin and the Beastie Boys. There's tension in the podcast, and I really encourage anyone to listen to it. Spike Jonze also sits in on it. But first of all, did you hear it?
I haven't heard the podcast. I saw the follow-up interview in the Washington Post with Rick Rubin, because the guy was saying that, Rick kind of skirted some of the potential conflict in the podcast, especially when it came to discussing what led to their fallout, which seems to have been financial. Apparently, like, he and Russell were making like 90% of the royalties, and the Beastie Boys themselves were making 10%. And I guess they felt a way, especially since Rick was considered to be kind of like the fourth member of the Beasties, And so I saw that. But what else? What was where was the
Well,
tension in
it's
the
interesting.
podcast?
Yeah, I mean, Rick does position himself as like the four of us, and it's wild too because if you've read the book, there was a fourth member of the Beastie Boys, Kate. Her last name's like Schellenbach, and she went on to become I believe the drummer in Luscious Jackson, which the Beastie Boys put out on Grand Royal. But when they were a punk band, it was the three of them and Kate, and they had made Cookie Puss and done these records, and then come across Rick Rubin and Russell, and the group very quickly evolved into License to Ill era Beasties. And there's a lot of regret in the book, both on how they treated their friends kind of as part of this, Manhattan, Brooklyn scene, but also like the misogyny in those records and kind of the frat bro, imagery. And in the book, they credit Rick with a lot of that. Rick was this guy from Long Island who really dug, AC/DC and Led Zeppelin, and I guess he liked like porn, and he brought a lot of his own style and projected it through the group. And he began as the DJ. So interviews going fine, a lot of pleasantries, little bit of awkwardness, and you have Spike Jones kind of coming in and mediating a bit. And then all of a sudden, I think it's Ad Rock that's like, yo, Rick, why did you leave us in the middle of the Madonna tour? It was said that you couldn't fly because you had an inner ear infection, but that never seemed accurate to me. And it's wild because, Rick Rubin is one of these guys, sort of like Dr. Dre or Eminem, maybe Kendrick Lamar, that I think we picture as living, on a cloud, and very rarely are they in a controversial light. And Rick, he answers the question. He goes, no, it's 100% real. But there's moments like that. And as Rick is kind of angling in as like the fourth member, you can hear these very like pregnant pauses from Mike and Adam. And I'm not trying to like, muckrake, but it was just a raw moment because, sort of like everyone wants to know, like, will De La Soul and Prince Paul ever make more music together? Which, they have, sporadically over time. Will, all of those kind of like questions, Snoop and Dre. And here you have a very successful diamond certified album in License to Ill. And it's wild. In 20 years, these guys haven't talked to a guy that kind of brought them in the game. And to have that discussion in public is crazy. And the other thing, I mean, it ends very abruptly. But what was dope too is, they just talk a lot about hip hop. Schoolie D and Slick Rick. They said that Rick had an early demo of Children's Story, and how in those years, in like 85, 86, the four of them would just play the hell out of that demo. Which is cool. And they do talk about, they give Ad Rock his props for kind of finding LL's demo tape, which, chartered the history of Def Jam,
Yeah, we talked about that, about him kind of fishing LL's demo out. Did he pull out of the trash, or no? He just found it in a pile and like listened
Yeah, I
to
think
it
the
and
pile.
brought the attention. Yeah. Actually, the Eagles. It was Jackson Brown who fished the Eagles demo tape out of the trash at Geffen, and
Oh, wow.
that's how the Eagles were he gave it to Geffen. But similar story with Ad Rock and LL. Like when you think about them, you would think that they, in particular, would not take for granted that they had time to kind of iron out their differences. Because obviously MCA is gone. And so things like that, I think, kind of give people perspective. Money is money. Everyone ended up doing okay. We made something great together. Let's go back and see if there's, a foundation there to repair it. But, it was interesting to see. It sounded like they were on that path. So, we'll see.
Yeah, no mention of money and no mention of like the complete redirection the group took with Paul's Boutique, which, if people want to understand more of that, I've never heard them really open up like they did in the book. And they talk about it a bit, in the Apple documentary. I encourage anyone to watch. It made all of this, made me, even yesterday when I checked the podcast, I put on License to Ill, which, as we're talking, is not an album that's aged gracefully, in terms of modern misogynistic lens and all that. But again, like, you still have to play it and understand it for what it is. And I've been doing that with that album, oddly enough.
Yeah. So we talked earlier about like Ye and other people who have broadened their reach far beyond music. An entity that has become really, really among probably the top 5 most popular acts for AFH now is Griselda. And Griselda released a trailer this week for a movie they have coming out. Did you get a chance to check out the trailer?
I did.
Yeah.
You know, it looks like it's shot pretty well.
It looks like, a classic hood flick. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
And you think about Streets is Watching and,
I
all the
got the
stuff.
hookup.
I got the hookup, all the stuff,
Uh-huh.
that Master P released. And Gunn, West Side Gun released an IG likening it to In That Tradition. Now we know now from looking at those films were very poor production value, acting left something to be desired, writing the whole nine, but they still felt good because they were fully self-contained and it seemed self-empowering. You know what I mean? Like for these guys who are making music to take their own destinies in their own hands and be able to create a film felt like they were taken to another level in terms of becoming entertainment entrepreneurs and moguls. So what do you think this represents as a next step for Griselda?
Yeah, I mean, I like it, and I'll agree with you. Like the trailer doesn't look like anyone needs to set aside any Oscar trophies. Like, but the thing that I likened it to is back in the '90s, or even the '80s. I mean, you can argue Crush Groove is not a hood flick, but there were some straight to VHS rap things that started to happen back then. But back then, like, you wanted to know more. I know for me, I've bought the VHS of Murder Was the Case, which, was never broadcast on MTV because I was a stan growing up for Dre and Snoop and Death Row, and I wanted to see everything there was to see. With Griselda, what's so interesting about these guys is even though they're so prolific, I mean, Gunn just announced he's got an album coming out in the next 2 weeks. And it feels like he puts out 3 or 4 a year now. He certainly did last year, but there's so much we don't know. Like, these guys don't even have Wikipedia pages the last time I checked. Like, so to see a video, even though they're playing, inevitably caricatures of themselves or whatever, you just want to know more. And if you buy into the music, that curiosity lends itself to other mediums. And I totally support these guys. I never thought No Limit made, I always thought Foolish was kind of good, a complete ode to Eddie Griffin. Like his stand-up was at a really good place in '98. But Rockefeller got good. I mean, I think that Paid in Full is a really good movie. My father loves that movie.
No, Paid in Full is a classic. That joint to me is just like up there with Menace and Boys in the Hood. Like it is, and Juice. Like it is like
right.
It's a classic. And Cam was brilliant in it. But yeah.
And Dame, put on Kevin Hart with Paper Soldiers, and there's cringy stuff in that, but every era got a little bit better. And Griselda, I mean, they're running with Rock, they're running with Shady. They seem to accomplish the most on their own. They could take it someplace interesting, and if nothing else, it lets the world know that these guys can act. And you can't tell me that. When I've watched Sopranos with Lord Jamar or Tretch or, go on and the legit acting roles that are available to MCs that can act, that West Side Gun or Conway or Benny couldn't play convincing roles in a theatrical picture, because I totally believe they could.
Yeah. For me, it's not even about the acting or even the quality of the film. It's more about what it represents as a progression for them as businessmen. And you start to think about the 3 people we just talked about, and you added Dre into that mix too, right? So you think about Dre, you think about Jay, you think about Master P, and each of them became moguls that were like exponentially more wealthy and more powerful than most musicians, specifically rappers at the time, because they were thinking from a very business standpoint. And they created diverse revenue streams. They had multiple revenue streams, and that's how people become wealthy. You don't become wealthy from a single revenue stream. You become wealthy from having many. And so Griselda branching out to me is more. I look at it from the business side of it rather than even the creative side. And I think that, we've met Gunn, we've met Benny a couple times, or, at least I have, like, and there's a difference in seeing someone on camera. No matter how many interviews you watch and how many times you listen to the music, there's a difference when you meet a person, in terms of like getting a sense of who they are. I had the same thing about Budden when I was back when I was working with Budden, before his State of the Union, and the podcast blew
Say the
up.
culture. Yeah.
So, yeah, I knew that Budden was a superstar that had not been unleashed, because in sitting and talking to him, I understood the fullness of his perspective, his intelligence, the whole nine, right? Meeting Gunn, at least I had this experience, and I suspect you did too. This guy, when you start to think about how strategic he has been in building this movement, and how dedicated he has been, and how expansive his thinking is around it, like, I would not be surprised if Gunn is a, several hundred millionaire by the time this thing is over, because he's being so intentional about building the Griselda empire. So to me, it's cool just to see that next step in the progression.
I feel that, and the thing that Griselda, long before they were even with Shady or Rock, they had this great ability to make people buy in an era where everything seems available to you for free. These guys created their own merch lines, that everything's limited edition, everything is collectible. They do that with vinyl, they've done that with posters, they've done that across the board. And and it's not just a money grab, because Gunn is an art collector, he's a designer, he's a visionary. They really kind of put that integrity back in the culture, and there's a reason why they sell out of everything in terms of product, and so many other artists are not able to, at a time when, you and I know from these videos or from t-shirts, whatever, it takes a number of steps to make somebody on Instagram stop what they're doing, pull out the credit card, Apple, you know what I mean? And Griselda has that. So to take it to video with the spotlight that they have right now and the resources, not only from a creative perspective, but from a venturing out revenue stream, people will buy it in a way that I'm not sure even Dame Dash is capable of today when he does that paywall stuff.
Yeah. And Benny had his Tiny Desk series at home this week, which was great. He didn't even do like his like outsized hits. He just did what he felt like doing. But it was still amazing. And he put on a couple MCs in the process, that he's working with from, I'm assuming they're BSF, rap soprano family artists. But, it's been almost exactly 12 months since he released The Plugs I Met. And when we interviewed him for that. But can you think of an MC who has had a stronger 12-month run over these last 12 months than Benny? Has anyone had a better 12 months this last 12 months than Benny?
I mean, the closest thing might be Freddie Gibbs. He's right there. But Benny, I mean, the thing that amazes me about Benny is so prolific. Gibbs is too, but Benny, it's like Tupac. It's like Doom in the mid-2000s. I mean, Benny can keep doing what he's doing. And it's just he takes it to a much, much higher level. What about you? I mean, is there anyone even close?
I'm getting my charger because I'm running out of juice, but man, it's not even close to me. Like, Benny, to me, is like, I think when MTV used to have the hottest MC of the year, remember that?
Sure.
I think that's Benny right now. I can't think of a single person who's had anything close to him. When you think about the big cats, like the Kendricks, the Drakes, the Coles, the people like that, those dudes have been pretty absent. Drake has done his thing, but he hasn't done anything outsized.
No.
Benny has been on multiple projects. He's had like all the stuff with, the Shady was announced before, but it's, starting to come to fruition now. And now it's like I'm giving like a full tour of the joint. But, he has been, I think, really, truly outstanding. And not only in the volume, but the quality of the stuff that he's
doing.
You know, every single thing he's done has been really from like even the Smoke Dizza stuff with Pete Rock was crazy. You
Yeah.
know, his project, the Griselda project. You know, the cameos. He's worked with the best MCs out, from Black Thought to Royce. You know, yeah, I can't see anybody having a stronger
Yeah, he's
presence.
super accessible. Yeah, I mean, really, that's that, and a case can be made for all of those projects being the best of that last year. I'm partial to the Griselda project. To me, I mean, people love the plugs I met, but Griselda, the three of those guys together, just really got it right for me. And
Oh, that's interesting
Benny
because
is
I
winning
remember
big.
back in the day, you were. I thought you were kind of lukewarm on that when it first came out.
I'm not sure I was lukewarm. I definitely appreciated it more and more over time, and there was some joints on there. The what is it, Moisel's? You know what I mean? The one record you really like.
Yeah,
You put it on the
on the
playlist,
playlist.
the
Yeah.
AFH playlist, and the joints that I like started shifting to other ones. So yeah, that when we did our annual voting the best album of the year, that was the one I went really hard for.
Right. So just to wrap it up, man,
Yeah,
Swiss Beats. Swiss Beats, who is a statesman of hip hop. You know, we've
yeah,
written about him and his business moves too, right? He did a Harvard Business School program, and you know, obviously he's done incredible things with Versus, which I want to get to in a second. But you know, he had a rare kind of like misstep this week, and you know, I say misstep because he later called it a misstep, but he had
yeah.
some choice words for Drake after a leak surfaced, and I'm assuming he believes that Drake let the record out, but it was a record with Drake and Busta Rhymes. I listened to it. It sounded to me very like 2010ish Drake, maybe
Yeah.
2011. Very young Drake, you know, both the rhyme style and his vocal tone. But you know, he had very choice words for Drake publicly on Instagram, and then later on apologized not for the words, but for saying them in the form that he said it. But what was your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised to see that. Just, I mean, Swizz is at such an elite level, and I love. I mean, you know, you and I have talked about it with Killer Mike and a number of people. I oftentimes at this point appreciate what Swizz has to say in an interview more than a lot of his music, and I am a fan of his music, and I have been for more than 20 years. It was just out of character, and you know, he he called he called Drake some words. Yeah, and it's funny too because I agree with you. The record sounded almost irrelevant. It wasn't like a joint that was about to come out or anything like that. But it raises an interesting question. You know, I don't know the economics of this, but I don't know if you know it was a joint that he never got paid for, and then you know Drake through his own platform has the ability to kind of drop you know unreleased stuff as so many artists do on their various platforms these days. But yeah, Swiss didn't mince words, and also got me wondering, you know, Drake and DMX back in the day kind of had a rift, and I
Is
remember
that right? What
DMX
was it about?
in the early like 2013 2014 I was still at Hip Hop DX, and I remember it was a crazy news cycle for us. DMX, I'm paraphrasing, but said that he wanted to like get alone with Drake in a phone booth or an elevator and like beat the shit out of him, just because he thought that rap was going soft. And I feel like Drake might have fanned the flames of that by not, you know, he had an opportunity to kind of give X his props and maybe took it somewhere else. I don't know all the logistics of it. I had heard on the Joe Budden podcast last week that there might be some spice due to the fact of the Drake record that Swizz worked on, Fancy, back in the day on Thank Me Later. That record was supposed to be a single and a video, and plans shifted. So maybe Swizz had kind of laid it on the line back then and didn't see the benefits. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting to me too. I can't say that I've ever seen Swizz really have problems with people. Have you?
I'm trying to think. No, not really. You know, he's generally the hip hop diplomat, right? He's an ambassador
Yeah,
for hip hop.
right.
Yeah, and you know, obviously he's spoken out a ton for X and others, and you know, he's like curated this amazing platform to showcase artists at their best. So yeah, no, I haven't seen that kind of
No,
negativity associated
and I
with it.
mean Drake
And
ruffles
Fancy, by
feathers.
the way, Fancy was a hot record. Yeah, Drake has ruffled a lot of feathers
Yeah.
over the years. So yeah,
Yeah, and I mean, early in Drake's career, there was a lot of artists. Whether you want to go at the Swiss level, which I know was album, and then you have your Fontes and your Elzais and your different folks that were there for Drake when he was making a transition. And it's not for me or you to say, but I don't know that that's always been reciprocated now that Drake has become probably the biggest superstar of the last 15 years.
yeah,
So yeah, it's interesting, but the one point of note is I don't know the OVO personnel like that. I mean, I know Drake and 40 and a few other characters, but Chubbs, which is a name I see more and more, who I guess is like OVO's head of security, maybe slash like Drake's enforcer. He was like, "Nah, just keep that same energy when you see a Swiss. Like, apology not accepted."
don't you think that's
So
odd though? Like, what I mean, if this is Swizz, like, why is security gonna like step up for Drake? Don't you think that's a little?
it's no different than like you and I have words and like your man has something to say and maybe my guy has something. You know what I mean? Like it's a moment in the spotlight where tempers are flaring. I'll bet you a gin martini. We'll never hear from this again. Drake might drop a little subliminal that maybe we'll sit back and go, was he getting at Swizz or was he getting at somebody else? But and at the end of the day, the record, like I said, it's cool, but it's not groundbreaking.
Yeah, well, I think you owe me a couple drinks anyway, and you're hiding under COVID, so I'm not gonna take you up on
Right,
that.
yeah, man. I'll buy you a Corona.
Yeah. Well, speaking of COVID
Um,
and
yeah.
great things that have happened aside from you ducking me on drinks, is is verses and obviously Swizz and Timberland. First of all, Timberland gets like left off on this. Like it's now just seems like it's Swizz's thing, but um, the next one is Monday, 29th, tomorrow, or today, actually. Freddie versus Jason, Jadakiss versus Fabulous. What do you think about that matchup?
I personally think that if they play by the rules that everyone else seems to be playing of like go with the hits, Fab will win. Jada, and I'll add this addendum. I personally listen to far more Jadakiss than Fab, but I think Fab's catalog is crazy, and I think even with no asterisks, Fab takes it. But if you look at it and Jada's playing his verse on features or his verse on Locks Records or D Block or whatever, it's still Fab. But I said this Jada could come and pull some New England Patriot shit if he really did a B-sides concert and just flat out played nothing but the hard, like mixtape stuff, knock yourself out type records. He could 100% take it, but I've yet to see in the verses anyone really jerk the wheel and go left. But if Jada really wanted to do a wake-up call and curate his own best of catalog as an MC, I think he could throw public perception, throw the room, and hand Freddie an L.
Yeah, I guess it really comes down to like what this is all about. Like if it's about like best bars and verses and all that, it's probably pretty even. I think people sleep on Fab. Fab is like an incredible punchline MC, and I think that like that's lost because he is like on so many big like pop radio hits, like especially with R&B hooks and stuff like that. But that dude can rap.
Yeah.
So bar for bar, I don't think it's a slam dunk, but I think that a lot of purists see Jadakiss as a superior MC, top 5 DOA. I think a lot of people believe, But when it comes to hit records, just hit records
Yeah.
between what Fab has, I'm so into you, like stuff with all sorts of like singers, like both him as the featured artist and him, rapping with the hook. Gigantic. He got monster hits for days. So I don't think it's a comparison. Whereas Jada's only
You going Fab?
He's only got a few radio records, right? Like
yeah.
we gonna make
Yeah.
it. you know, All About the Benjamins. You know, what else? Like, I can't think of too many big radio hits that Jada.
He got the joint on the 2009 Last Kiss with the Supremes. You know what I mean? That sample. So bad. Yeah.
You're making my point. You're making my point.
No, I mean, and we're agreeing. Yeah, and I think that Fab is really one of those artists that people will never feel comfortable to say. Like, honestly, I mean, Fab came out with that first album when I was in high school. I wasn't privy to a lot of the Clue mixtapes that he, you know, cut his teeth on. But when I got to college in Philly, there was a bunch of my friends, some of whom actually comment on our on our post. They were all from Canarsie. They were all Brooklyn guys, and Fab was their guy. Like, Fab was who they rode for as an MC. And I saw that a lot at AFH. Like, Fab articles do really well, but they might not always get a ton of comments. They might not be the most provocative, but people really rock with Fab. Not only the Bar You to Death songs, but also the soul tape, the R&B features, the videos that reference, you know, old movies and stuff like that. Fab's got it, and I think he'll have it on Monday night.
Yeah, and that's zero shade of Jada. You know,
no,
you know, I love Lox. I love Jada as an independent artist, and I think he's supremely talented. You know, but you know, it really is. It's if radio hits, and I don't like put a premium on radio hits. You know, like my guy. You know, Kendrick. You know, I actually didn't think that. You know, French Montana's comment was really that outlandish to say that he had more hits than Kendrick. When you think about radio hits. Like, French has been on some monstrous radio hits. Kendrick has only had a few, you know. DNA, Humble were big, and those are both Mike Will joints, which were radical departures from anything Kendrick had done before that. You know, he had, I don't even know that All Right was a big radio hit. It was a social impact hit, but, you know.
Yeah, live hit.
Yeah,
and Biggie was like that. I mean,
swimming pools maybe, but, you know, he hasn't had that many hits, right? But his impact is gigantic, you know, so I think the same applies for Jada.
And I feel like there's a lot more people that might know a Kendrick, that might know the lyrics to Mad City, which was never a single. I've never heard it on radio, not once. Then they might know, and this isn't to throw shade at French Montana, but then they know the verses of French on the records that he's part of.
Yeah.
So it's a whole thing. And I'll say one more thing. I mean, I do think that the Nightmare on Elm Street album, you know, or whatever it was, Friday the 13th on Elm Street.
Yeah.
That, you know, came out at the very end of 2018, if I'm not mistaken. That project was truly, you know, my favorite thing that those guys had done in the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was incredibly slept on. You know, Def Jam has always been criticized for these end of year kind of like tax write-off releases. That joint, if you've not heard it or you only heard it when it came out, go back, because that, I hope they do a second one of that, because that was the joint. And Swizz Beatz on that, he was the, you know, he was the ace in the hole. So
yeah. Now, do you think this one happens in person, or do you think it happens remotely?
That's a really good question. I bet remote. It would be dope to see it in person, and they did move it to Monday night, which I think is, as we've talked about, you get in high summer here. This does better on a Monday night than a Saturday night all day long.
Do you prefer the ones in person or the ones remote?
I don't really have an opinion, but I have heard some people say that if you can get it to one room, it makes for a better audio experience. I don't know if that's true or not.
Oh yeah, it's definitely true. Like the Alicia Keys, John Legend one sounded pristine. It was the best sounding one I've seen so far. Although Jill and Erica, I thought sounded fine too.
You know, as we talk about just, you know, in the closing minutes, the Roots picnic happened online yesterday. They redid it as a voting initiative, which is dope. And I am 95% sure. I saw that Black Thought and Questlove went back to the Mann Center, which is in part of West Philadelphia, Fairmount Park, and they did a freestyle this week, and it's dope. It's like 5 minutes long. Questlove drops the beat on East Flatbush Project, Tried by 12, like great hip hop instrumentals. Tariq does what he does, but it's funny because they clearly taped that this week, and I was I was in drive-through to get my iced coffee in the morning, and I am 90% sure that Black Thought was behind me. And it only makes sense because that particular coffee shop with a drive-through is like a football field away from where they take that.
Oh, that's
But
crazy.
he definitely had some caffeine before he spit that. So as you know, you talk about Benny, man, Black Thought's freestyles over the last, I mean, his whole career, but really over these last 4 years are insane. Encourage everyone to watch it. It's on their page. So
that's super dope. Yeah, you know, I prefer these. I actually think I prefer them done remotely, just because, like, I think that you know, the John Legend and Alicia Keys was cool having them play back to back piano, but them having to get up and dance and stuff during their, like, it's not necessarily the best look sometimes. Like, so but yeah.
Plus the conversation. I mean, Jill and Erica took that to a new plateau of just like you and I are doing right now. I know you don't love Zoom calls. You do them all week long, but to have the undivided attention of, meanwhile, there's 500,000 people tuned in, but here we are. That made for a really cool experience. That's rare access.
So I didn't even know it was happening, which is sad, because I know that's become a thing for you and me. That's like one of the events, the highlights of our year. We go to that together, kind of like, see artists that we have covered for a long time and like enjoy that experience, both like, watching them perform, but also interacting with them, bonding. It's usually when you buy me the drinks that you owe me, it's a really good time. So like, yeah, the fact that they had to be online this year is tough, but I'm gonna go check that freestyle out as soon as this is over. But,
yeah, I didn't watch any of the rest of that, but that freestyle is dope. And that venue, man, last year was probably my favorite year ever, especially in terms of just vibe. And, as you remember, man, I was sick as a dog last year.
Yeah, that's right. I was keeping my 6 feet social distance from last year. I remember that.
Yeah, man.
Yeah. Yo, man. So again, glad that you are okay mentally and obviously physically. What's your song of the week?
Man, I'm gonna choose out of the great canon of just like WTF rap records. You and I talk a lot about the joint Kendrick has, Feel, how beautiful that is. I'm gonna give it up to Fonte, The Good Fight, on Fonte's first solo album, Charity Starts at Home. If you are having a bad day, I am convinced that is one of the greatest records of all time. And I'm not having a bad day today, but I had a few of them over the last month. I'm going to give it up to Tigolo.
That's dope. That's really dope. Mine is a song that I heard yesterday that has been one of my favorites since it dropped. Like, I probably listen to the song once a month at least, on average. And it's one that I got to hit rewind most of the times when I hear it. But it's DJ Jazzy Jeff featuring Raheem Devon, My Soul Ain't For Sale. Yeah, love that joint. And,
which album was that on?
Was that on the late Magnificent, I think, part 2.
Yeah.
Incredible.
That's dope.
I'll send it to you.
Yeah, please do, man. Well, thank you. And I look forward. We got guests coming up for some of July. So, man, onward and upward. We got some cool stuff in the pan.
Word. Stay tuned. All right. Yep. What's the headline? That's the name of the podcast. I'm Reggie Williams. I got Jay Payne with me, and peace.
Peace.
Thank you.